Why, hello there, old sports. Somewhat recently in the Five Nights at Freddy series, I've seen various fans suggest the idea of doing a reboot of the main timeline, or just making a spin-off series of the games that aim to have a more cohesive story. Now, while I have my own opinions on how complicated the FNaF lore actually is, those are just my opinions, and what the most popular common opinion is that the FNaF timeline is an overcomplicated, chaotic mess of storytelling, if the term storytelling even accurately describes whatever the Five Nights at Freddy's games have. Now, I love FNaF, and I actually really enjoyed the latest mainline game, that of course being Secret of the Mimic. And while I do like the idea of some sort of official remastered timeline, or reboot, looking at how secondary media have both been treated by both the people in charge of the series and the fans, well, it concerns me. Because that's the thing. We've had multiple soft reboots that have happened throughout the series, in different mediums of course, and each time they've had their own problems. And I think the people really rallying for an official reboot seem to think that just rebooting the series and building the timeline back up from the ground is some sort of magic bullet that would solve all of the story issues currently present. But as much as I would like there to be such a simple solution to a complicated problem, I really don't think there is. So today, I would like to talk about how a reboot could fail, and how it already has, for both reasons in and out of Scott's direct control. Now, first of all, what do people mean by a reboot in this case? Because you could argue that FNaF Help Wanted tried to act as a pseudo or soft reboot of the series, if it actually decided to stick with that idea instead of abandoning it halfway through the game when it was revealed that the comments about the previous games being fake was fake itself. No, what people mean is that they want Scott and Steelwool to either end the current story or the current arc, and to start afresh without all the baggage and problems that come with the current monster of a story. I'm sure we all know that the original Scott Click Team games were made one at a time with little to no planning, at least in the story department. Because even though Scott has gone on to mention he knew what kind of aesthetic he wanted for certain games, he has never really mentioned anything along the lines of having specific story ideas planned out, at least by the time of Ultimate Custom Night, because after that he probably did start putting more planning into things. But that doesn't mean everything that came beforehand wasn't a unplanned rush of just get the game out, get the game out, get the game out. So I'm sure if us as the fans feel like the story is hard to work with, it's a very safe bet that Scott feels the same. Hell, he's even stated before that the story is hard to work with, back when the Silver Eyes released in 2015. That was 11 years ago. So it makes a lot of sense as to why the fans find the idea of just starting over with some better planning as an attractive idea. But would that actually be a good idea? You could argue both the Silver Eyes trilogy and the movies are reboots or retries at the story in their own ways. But if there's one major complaint that both of those sub-series share, it's a lack of good writing. The novel trilogy goes off the rails and gets so convoluted and confusing that the story just feels messy and just dumb by the end. And while the story of the movies isn't finished quite yet, so far they have problems with pacing and giving focus to the wrong topics, on top of just general sloppy writing. Now, I do think Secret of the Mimic has the best standalone story in the series, so it's far from impossible for this series to be written well. But acting like just starting a story over anew with the same general premise as some sort of magical fix-all is incorrect, because as I mentioned, we've tried that before, and just because it's new and we can start from the ground with some better planning doesn't automatically make it good. Also, even if many people would feel glad to have a fresh start with the series, especially newcomers, I'd guess that just as many, if not more people, would be frustrated that this storyline some of them have been following for over a decade was being sidelined or just straight up ended just for the sake of starting over with the same general premise. On top of that, I have this weird gut feeling that since Scott has refused to end the timeline before multiple times, that he wouldn't want to end this current story now, if that makes sense. I just don't see him doing it until something big comes up, or I don't know, maybe something big out of universe, like in the real world, would affect his decisions. But again, that's getting kind of uncomfortable because I'm kind of, that'd be theorizing about a real person's life, but you understand what I mean. Ultimately, I guess my point here is I just don't really see Scott wanting to reboot the series, because that's the thing, no matter if it's a good idea or not to reboot the series, if Scott doesn't want to do it, it's not going to happen. And forgive me for being a little cynical, going back to the earlier point of the fact that some people would probably be upset if this long-running story ended abruptly, I think another thing is that why rock the boat? The series is going fine-ish right now. Like I said with Secret of the Mimic, I feel like that proves that the game still can have good stories. So again, why rock the boat? Why shake things up when you're finally getting back into a comfortable stride? Now, I have talked about my issues with FNaF and its way of communicating, or lack thereof, before, but to save us both some time, I'm gonna go over some stuff again quickly. First off, FNaF tends to refuse to communicate with fans in terms of what's going on currently with new releases, especially when it comes to marketing new releases, at least recently with Secret of the Mimic. On top of that, we've also had issues on communicating over the updates to existing titles, like the VR mode for Secret of the Mimic. This has gotten to the point of not shutting down rumors that end up causing people to get harassed. FNaF also seems to hate giving any answers to any of the universe mysteries, to the point where we aren't even sure what's canon or not anymore, because no one will tell us, and we all just end up with petty arguments amongst ourselves. So with that very brief and oversimplified summary of some things, I'd like to bring up that due to this poor communication from official channels, lots of easily avoided arguments tend to spring up. And I don't mean discussions, I mean arguments. These fights aren't anything like a reasonable disagreement or debate about what's true or not. They're just tiring fights over things that should have been laid out by the people in charge. And the worst part is that no one can prove each other right or wrong. You just have evidence that points to an idea, but there isn't any concrete proof to go one way or the other, so everyone feels like they need to keep arguing for their favorite theory like it's a sports team. So if FNaF ever did try to reboot, I know they wouldn't communicate what was happening well, and lots of fights would start that would then go on for years on end. You might be asking how I know, and that's because it has happened before. Now thankfully when the Silver Eyes novels came out, Scott mentioned that they took place in their own continuity, and the movies are so obviously different that anyone worth listening to can understand easily that they are also in a different continuity. But the thing is that for some fucking reason, it feels like half the fans cannot accept or understand the idea that adaptations can have creative differences or changes. And the thing is, some people can, but other people, it's very unclear what is a creative change for the adaptation or what is meant to be used in the mainline series. But just because something is true in one timeline doesn't mean it's automatically true in another. But like I said, since barely anything in this series is ever confirmed to be true or not, you can't prove or disprove anything, even if common sense points in one direction. Ultimately, what ends up happening is people will argue for hours about things, no game or person will clear anything up, and then people will continue to either argue, or on the rare chance they agree, they could also just be unknowingly wrong, or maybe not, because again, no proof one way or the other, or no damning proof one way or the other. In the second Five Nights at Freddy's movie, we are introduced to that universe's version of Michael Afton, and it's a major sticking point on if this character is meant to be accurate or different to the games. Some people think that Michael never went on a redemption arc at any point in the series, because he's evil in the second movie. Some argue that this is just a different character using a familiar name, and that Vanessa fills the role of Michael played in the games. But as I mentioned earlier, you cannot prove things one way or the other. What then ends up happening is that both sides take this as meaning their own side is right, and they end up being really smug about it. But maybe that's just my experience, I'm not sure. Now, this is also just a personal pet peeve of mine, but I do kind of hate how some people after the movie came out kind of started trying to revise things and be like, no, things were always this way, and you were dumb for thinking otherwise. Because it's not like we've had this idea of these characters in our heads for years, and if Scott never stopped to correct us, I feel like it's not our fault for getting attached to these versions of the characters we make in our minds. Because even if Michael is supposed to, in the games, is supposed to be accurate to how he acts in the movie, we didn't know that, because we don't get any characterization for Michael in the games, beyond just that he likes gum, or that he likes money. So yeah, he's just a normal guy, I guess. I understand that Scott wants to keep the mystery alive, but if you make things too confusing, eventually people will just give up and stop caring. And both that and just explaining too much will end up with you in the same place, even if one takes longer than the other. Personally, I like the idea of a possible FNaF reboot, and I think it definitely could work, if handled properly. But that's just the thing. Even if I want to give the benefit of the doubt, I worry that this series will act like it always has, and it might just cause problems overall. On top of that, I've seen people argue that the series doesn't even need a reboot, and I can legitimately see both sides. I feel like with Secret of the Mimic, FNaF is finally finding its stride again, and throwing that away feels like a waste, especially if it was just for an idea that might not work, or that could even blow up in their face. There's just too many expectations, and too much baggage around the official mainline series. And again, this is ignoring the fact that Scott has shown no interest in this idea himself, and like I said, if Scott doesn't want to do it, it's not going to happen. But the thing is, there is potential. Like I said, there's so many expectations around the official mainline games, but that's where the fans can come in. For as many fans as there are who just want to argue or treat specific theories like sports teams who they will undyingly follow, there are plenty of fans who just see FNaF as almost an endless well of inspiration. Even if people aren't remaking the mainline story in their own ways, people have always been taking inspiration from these funny bear games, and I think that's kind of beautiful. People like the Insightful Llama with her FNaF movie rewrite, or the Unwithered Truth with his game remakes. And I just think those projects, stuff like that, is super cool, and it shows that even if people feel kind of disappointed by some aspects of the series, if anything, they can use that to make something cool by itself. And to those who want to remake the original story with their own little twist on it, there's still so much opportunity to show yourself and your ideas through how you take the same tale and change it here or there. One of the best parts about this is how much more leeway is given to fan projects compared to the original games, at least most of the time. Because even some of the fanverse participants still have some expectations on them now that they're spin-offs of the series and not just fan projects. When you're purely making something for the love of it, people tend to give you more goodwill as long as you don't do something awful. So if you want to change details of the original story because you think it works better, most people can still give it a chance, because at the end of the day, if they don't agree, they can just find another fan game or comic or whatever that fits what they're looking for, and it's not like it's official, so no skin off their back. Now, of course, there are people who would hate on you or others because you're changing things or just not changing enough, but there's always going to be people like that, and their opinions shouldn't stop you from making art. Ultimately, I feel that while an official reboot would be more trouble than it's worth, fans doing their own versions of this tale is such a great thing for the community, and the series as a whole. And this may just be cynical of me, but occasionally I almost see FNaF as less of a series to enjoy for the games, but more for what can be used for fan works. Even if a game or movie or book isn't very good or isn't very satisfying, it can still be added to this giant FNaF pot and be pulled from by the fans to make something better, or at least something interesting. So go out, make art, make something inspiring. Go out and make that comic where Toy Chica gives Mangle slop. I really hope you enjoyed this video. It means a lot to me that you give me some of your time today. I have some bigger projects cooking in the background, and that's why I've been making a lot more of these smaller videos, because I'll just get an idea that I have, and then over a day or two I'll make a video about it, and then here I am. Which is probably slowing down the stuff on my bigger projects, but that's a problem for me to deal with. I'd like to thank my channel members, Wally73, Sven Biscuit, and Amarin98 for their continued support. It means the world to me. If you have any extra cash that you just need to burn for some reason, maybe don't set it on fire, and consider giving it to me. Only if you really want to, though, no pressure. Again, I really appreciate your time regardless. And overall, just have a good day, night, morning, whatever time it is for you. And I'll see you on the flip side. Hopefully with something cooler than just me babbling again.